Welcome to Refactoring Paleo. My name is Thomas Moore, and today we're discussing linting and formatting Swift code in our project. One of the goals in this refactoring process should be making the code readable and understandable for our future selves. We come back in 6 months, a couple of years, or somebody new comes onto the project. The code should be understandable. It shouldn't be cryptic. It shouldn't be a mystery on how things work. One of the tricks to making it understandable is just making it consistent. Linting and formatting tools will help us maintain consistent looking code. So what is linting? Linting is a form of static analysis. It is designed to look at your code and not the compiled end product. So it will examine your code and identify different kinds of issues. Sometimes they're coding errors, sometimes it's just enforcing style and looking for violation of best practices. In other words, things that aren't technically wrong code, it's just not the best code. So really, this is a way to get to cleaner code. So if you want to know more, you can look at this link for linting at Wikipedia. I'll put a link to the show notes for you. And then we can go into looking at these two particular tools that we want to use for our project. SwiftLint is the first tool we're going to use. It is a linter, and it enforces Swift coding styles. And it can identify some kinds of problems and best practices. The way it works is it has a series of rules which are primarily built around regex and other types of code matching, and it applies those rules to the code. The advantage of this particular tool is that you can turn these rules on and off. If you don't like the rule, you can just turn it off. If you like a rule, you can have it turned on. You can even create your own custom rules. For example, you may want to enforce a particular way of coding. And it's very easy to install. You can install it with Homebrew, but there are other ways to install it as well. And then you simply add it to your build phase, and then you can have it lint your code all the time, which is a very powerful way of using it. There's also a supplemental tool that we'll use today called SwiftLint AutoDetect. SwiftLint AutoDetect is a great tool for setting up your SwiftLint configuration and identify where your current errors are. So if you have a large code base and you want to adopt SwiftLint, SwiftLint AutoDetect will make it easy to adopt. Basically, any rule you violate, it'll turn itself off, and you can turn those on and fix them at your own pace. Now, there's another tool we're going to look at. SwiftFormat. SwiftFormat is more of a code formatter, although it does do linting as well. The goals behind SwiftFormat is a little bit different than the goals behind SwiftLint. Since it's a code formatter, the main thing it does is goes in and alters your code to match a certain format. Like SwiftLint, it has a series of rules and customizable set of rules that you can turn on or turn off depending on what you want. SwiftFormat is a bit like SwiftLint, but has a different set of rules and a different set of purposes. The main role of SwiftFormat is a code formatter. Unlike SwiftLint, it looks and identifies and tells you where there are problems, SwiftFormat will actually format your code. Like SwiftLint, it has a series of rules that you can turn on and off for when the SwiftLint functionality is run. This, again, enforces consistent code format. One drawback of this tool is that since it does actually alter your code, it can be a little disconcerting and sometimes problematic while you're trying to actually work. So you have to be a little bit more sparing on how you use SwiftFormat compared to SwiftLint. And installation is very similar. You can do a homebrew install of Swift format, and then you set up your rules, and then you can add it to a build phase if you so choose. But there's other ways to run it. In particular, we have a supplemental tool called Swift Format for Xcode, which is really a Xcode plugin where you can run Swift format on command. So now that we kind of have an idea what the Swift format and SwiftLint tools are, let's incorporate them into our project. Here we are in our project. The first thing we want to consider before we start adding SwiftLint and Swift format is just to see how many warnings and errors do we have. So let's run tests. We can see there's a number of problems. These last two, are having to do with drag and drop and deprecated methods. This is kind of a big change, so I would love to get rid of it right away, but that's going to be beyond the scope of this episode. But there's a few other things we can do to help clean things up. Let's start with dealing with this copy bundle phase. Basically says we don't need to copy the info plist. So let's build and run tests. Now, something went wrong here in the tests, but let's assume for a moment that these new warnings that came up should be handled first. So let's update the settings. Let's migrate all these zips into a more modern format. And let's enable base internationalization. So let's run tests. Our tests are failing. If you look down here, it's basically saying it's having trouble mapping things. It likely has something to do with our build settings. So we need to make sure that the project itself has enabled hardened runtime for normal builds turned off. Turn it off for normal builds. Let it work for release. Okay, there we go. The next thing we can fix is this function prototype declaration. This is kind of a weird format for Objective-C. And just by copying and pasting and making it into a prototype function is not going to work. But I found if we just add void here, move this up to the top, we now have gotten rid of that warning. The next one is this description with calendar format, time zone. This is an old format. Let's just experiment real quick. I believe this will be a good replacement. You don't need the semicolon. Let's build and run. Okay. So now we've got it down to these two warnings. We do still have this nib loading warning, and it's because I have a view that was from another library that I did not bring in. So I'll probably do that off camera. Hopefully that will be fixed in this project, but it will not be shown here. So now we've got it down to just 2 warnings. So we'll have to remember that's the only warning count we should have from this point forward. I've already installed SwiftLint, and I've also installed SwiftLint Auto-Generate. So let's go through the process of getting SwiftLint in our project. Okay, here we are at the SwiftLint page in GitHub, and we can scroll down and you'll find the instructions to install it. And being that I have a Apple Silicon Mac, I want to make sure that I'm using the new path for Homebrew in the script, so I can just copy this and I can create a new build phase. So here's our list of build phases. Let's create one. It's going to be a run script build phase. Let's SwiftLint. And here, turn that dependency analysis check off. So now it'll run every time we build. What does it actually do? First, to make sure that the Homebrew bin path is in the scripts path, check to see if SwiftLint is available. If it is, run SwiftLint. If not, it'll produce a little warning in your build log saying that SwiftLint is not installed. And that's sufficient. But SwiftLint also cautions that we have to have enable user script sandboxing turned off. If we don't have this turned off, we won't be able to run the script. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to turn that off for both. And I'm going to go ahead and do it in unit test as well. There's a reason for the one in unit test. We'll talk about that in a little bit. So in theory, SwiftLint will now run. So our build failed. Why did it fail? Interestingly, it's failing because SwiftLint is telling you have a failure. Basically, that the rule type name is failing because this unit test type is not a proper name within this project. Well, let's find it. Hit Command Shift J. It should find it over here, but it's actually not there anywhere. So it's a file I have in my project, but I don't have it under management in Xcode. And looking at this code, it's not code I want anyway. It's just a sample test. So let's bring in my command line. I'm going to find it with that. There we go. And remove it. So let's build again. Okay. So here we are. We have no warnings or errors associated with SwiftLint. But this is a very, very basic version of SwiftLint. We have not set up our rules. So let's use SwiftLint Auto-Detect to do that. Again, you can install this through Homebrew. And I already have it installed. So here's our command. SwiftLint-Auto-Detect generate and the path to our project. Note, if you have a space in any of the names, you'll have to use quotes. The slash will not work. And we'll probably have to run it more than once. So the first time we run it, it's basically saying that some of the rules that are in SwiftLint Auto-Detect are out of date and deprecated. So let's run this again so we can get past this one. So if you look through this list, you can see that these are the rules that are turned on. And when the hash mark is in front of it, that's a rule that's been turned off. So let's take the opportunity and actually write it to where SwiftLint expects it, which is .swiftLint.yaml. So that's the top level of your project. Now I'm going to go ahead and go to VS Code and take a look at SwiftLint. Okay. VS Code is much nicer to view this file because it has a bunch of nice features. So let's run this again and we'll come back to this. So right now, those same three rules are saying that it's deprecated. Now we have to go ahead and remove these from our list. So the any object, let's get rid of that one. Get rid of the inert defer. And then unused capture list. So other than that, we should not have any SwiftLint warnings or errors because all the auto detect turned off all the rules we violate. Okay, we're back down to our original 2 warnings. So let's take a quick look through our SwiftLint rule list and just make a decision. Do we want to turn those rules that are off on? So let's go through our list. Explicit ACLs. I'm not fond of this unless you're working with modules. Some people like to take your application and just have a very thin layer and everything else is a module underneath. In that case, you really need explicit ACLs. ACLs, of course, are marking classes and functions as private, public, and internal. The thing is, once you start, you're kind of in for it the whole way. So I'm not a big fan of turning these on unless the project calls for it. What about this one? Explicit enum raw value. Well, I know I don't want this one, but I will go ahead and turn it on and see what happens. So I have a value, an invalid case. Basically what it's saying is that this case should have a string to represent its value. Modern Swift doesn't require me to do that. So to make it conform, I would have to do the following. Make that equal to this string. So that will make it conformant. But you can also see that I'm also getting another SwiftLint problem with a different rule saying that this is unnecessary. So it's kind of a one or the other kind of thing. So I would rather go with the approach of not doing that. So let's go ahead and turn that rule back off. And while I'm at it, I'm going to add another comment at the end saying that I'm not going to use this particular rule. If I wanted a rule turned on at some point, I would put a comment in there, this is a must-have or something like that. So explicit top-level ACL, I know I don't want that. Explicit type interface, let's see what that is. So basically what they're asking for is this. And that will solve that warning. But just as we did before up here, this is now redundant. We don't need it because it's also defined here. So I don't want that rule on. File header, I know I don't want that on there. It's basically going to complain about the amount of stuff at the beginning. And this is kind of required for copyright purposes. So I am going to not turn that off as well. What about let var whitespace? You know, I kind of like that a little bit, so I'm going to go ahead and leave that rule in and just fix it. If I feel like I need to, I can always turn it off later. Prefix top level constant. Let's see what that says. Oh yeah, I know what this is. This is to basically put on a special prefix if it's something that's at the top level. It's very common in C languages that you put a K in front of stuff as a constant. I'm not that fond of that, especially in Swift and Objective-C code. So I'm going to leave that one off, and I'm not going to turn that one on. This one requires a dinit function. I don't think that's necessary, so I'm going to say do not use. Here's an interesting one. I'm kind of split on these, so let's turn on this first one. White space at closing braces. Or violation here. And I kind of like the look of that being tight together. So I'm going to leave that one on. What about at opening braces? I'm not fond of getting rid of this. To make it compliant, I would have to get rid of that. And it feels a little tight to me. I don't mind this because there's no text, but there's a lot of text in a very small amount of space. I kind of like having the space there. Again, this is totally up to you in your own project. So I'm going to turn this one back off, and I'm not going to turn it back on. So let's run the build and run. So we got a trailing white space. We want to get rid of that. And we're down to our original 2 warnings. So SwiftLint is now doing its job. Now let's get SwiftFormat going. SwiftFormat is a little bit different. Unlike SwiftLint, where we're just running it as we build the app, one of the things we'll probably want to do is change how we use SwiftFormat in comparison to SwiftLint. So let's look at that secondary tool, SwiftFormat for Xcode. I have it here. And here's the application. What's handy about this is that it gives you all the rules. It will give you a brief description of those rules. And will actually be able to save and load the rules. Some of these are fun, have fun names like Yoda conditions, where you have values on the wrong side of the equal sign. But most of them are very basic and do different things. Now the question is, how do we use SwiftLint or SwiftFormat? We could put it in our build phase, as we do with SwiftLint. Actually, now that I'm here, I'm going to move that up right under compile. I could put it here, but every time you compile it, it's going to update the code, and we may not want that. So we have a couple alternatives. One is to put it in unit tests. So let's see how this goes. We're going to create a new run step and call this SwiftFormat. Turn that one off. So here we are at the SwiftFormat page. You can go down, you can see all the different ways we can install it. And just like in SwiftLint, we can take a look at how to add it to our project. So just like in SwiftLint, this code is almost exactly the same as SwiftLint. And that also implies we need to have this correctly set up in the build settings to not require sandboxing for scripts when we run this. So let's also move this up. So let's see if it runs. And we'll build and test. So this is kind of a new warning that apparently is connected to Swift format. It wants the Swift version. We'll see if we can fix that in a little bit. So how do we run Swift format? We can go to our Swift file, and we can go to our editor. Once you've set up and configured Swift format for Xcode, you can format the file. Notice it doesn't really change anything here for us, although it may have changed something. Since I'm not using it, it automatically took out the name of the parameter since I don't need it. That's handy. But again, we want to make sure we customize our rules. And here's one, and I think about it, is not something I want to have. It automatically put a comma after here. So chances are SwiftLint is going to have a problem with it. So we want to see if we can fix those two things. So that's this rule. I want to turn that off. Now, be aware that this has not turned it off for the project. It's just turned it off for Swift format for Xcode. So if I want it for the project, I now need to save it. So automatically going to give me the name. I'm going to put it in my project and save it. So let's build. Now you can see SwiftLint is now complaining about this. So there is a bit of a battle at times between Swift format and SwiftLint. You just need to sort of work out the rules. And notice when I saved that Swift format file, so in theory, I could always read this from disk and be able to edit it here and save it back, or I could just run it in different ways. Okay, one last thing. We need to make sure that we have the correct Swift version in here. So let's go back to the rules. I've already gone ahead and set this up to be Swift 5.9, which is the current version I have for the project. Now that little tool is getting a little outdated, so it doesn't have Swift 5.9 in the tool, so I had to manually set it. But that's all we need to do. So if we build and run tests, we've run SwiftLint and we've run Swift format, and we have no additional warnings. That's a great place to start. And so as we move forward, we may find that we need to turn off some of these rules or turn on some rules that we previously had off. But either way, we're in a good place to move forward. And so next time, hopefully we can get into some of the meat of this project and start making some substantial changes and improvements to the overall application. This has been Refactoring Paley Rose for SwiftLint and Swift Format. My name is Thomas Moore. I hope to see you again next time. Be sure to like and subscribe. Have a good one. Okay, so the Swift version still needs to be updated, so let's go to VS Code. And let's just stick Swift version in here, and let's make it 5.9, since that's the current version of Swift. Let's see if we get rid of that warning. Okay. So now we've successfully implemented SwiftLint and Swift Format in our project. Now, all we have to do now is just get going. Next time, hopefully we'll dig into some important code and start making real modifications and updates to the project. My name is Thomas Moore, and this has been Refactoring Paley Rose, SwiftLint and Swift Format. Thanks. Be sure to like and subscribe.